The argument was a stupid one, the kind that only sprouts in the stale, recycled air of a car on the 7th hour of a road trip. It was about a map. A real paper map, currently folded into a mess of defiant creases in Maya's lap. "I'm just saying," she said, her voice tight. "If we'd use this, we'd know exactly where we are. This thing," she jabbed a finger at the dead screen of my phone mounted on the dash, "has led us to the middle of nowhere." "It's not nowhere, Maya." "It's the scenic route," I countered, my hands gripping the steering wheel of my Ford Explorer a little too tightly. "It's West Virginia. It's all scenic route." The truth was, I'd been distracted by the sheer overwhelming green of the Appalachians pressing in on us. The mountains weren't jagged and dramatic like the Rockies. They were ancient, rounded, and dense, with trees that seemed to drink the sunlight before it could reach the road. I'd been trying to point out a hawk circling a distant ridge when she'd muttered something about the GPS cutting out 20 minutes ago. I'd missed the turn for Route 219, and my pride was too stubborn to admit it. The paved highway had long since given way to a cracked asphalt road, which in turn had degenerated into what was little more than a gravel path. The trees formed a claustrophobic canopy overhead, their branches interlocking like the gnarled fingers of skeletal hands. Patches of thick, soupy fog clung to the low-lying areas, caressing the road with ghostly tendrils. We hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of gravel under our tires and the low, ominous hum of the engine. "See? Even the car hates it here," Maya said, gesturing toward the dashboard. The check engine light had flickered on a few miles back, a small, malevolent orange eye. "It's just a sensor. It does that sometimes when the air is damp." I tried to sound confident, but a cold knot was tightening in my stomach. The engine gave a worrying shudder, a cough that vibrated through the floorboards. I tapped the gas, and it hesitated before lurching forward. We were losing power. "Ethan, pull over," Maya said, her voice losing its argumentative edge and gaining a tremor of real fear. "We should just turn around." "Turn around to what?" "We don't know how far back the turn was. We're low on gas. We keep going forward. There has to be a town or a gas station eventually." Logic. That was my anchor. There is always a logical solution. The road twisted again, a sharp unbanked curve that forced me to slow to a crawl. As we rounded the bend, my headlights cut through the gloom and landed on it. It was a wooden sign so weathered it was almost gray, half swallowed by overgrown ivy. It leaned at a drunken angle, its surface pocked with what looked like old buckshot holes. In faded, peeling black letters, 2 words were just barely legible: Blackwood Ridge. An arrow, its tip rotted away, pointed down an even narrower, darker path that branched off from the one we were on. I stopped the car. The engine sputtered and died with a final metallic sigh. I turned the key. Nothing but a disheartening click. I tried again. Click, click. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I muttered, slumping against the headrest. Maya was silent, her face pale in the dim twilight filtering through the windshield. She was staring at the sign. "I don't like this, Ethan." "We don't have a choice," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. "That sign means there's a town. A town means people. People mean a phone, a mechanic, something." I opened the door, and the cool, damp air of the forest flooded the cab. It was heavy, thick with the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. The silence outside was even more profound, a living entity that seemed to press in from all sides. "But it's not on the map," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. She had unfolded the paper map. her small phone light illuminating the intricate web of roads. I've checked this whole quadrant. There's no Blackwood Ridge. It doesn't exist. I walked to the front of the SUV, my boots crunching on the gravel. I popped the hood for show, knowing full well I wouldn't know what to look for. All I saw was a silent, complex block of metal and wires. Behind me, the woods were a wall of impenetrable shadow. The sun was sinking fast behind the mountain ridge and the temperature was dropping. We were stranded. My phone was a useless brick. Maya's was the same. The town was our only hope. Maps can be old, honey. Towns die, new ones pop up. It's probably just a small, unincorporated place, a mining town maybe. I tried to sound reassuring, for her sake as much as mine. I slammed the hood shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive stillness. I looked back at the sign. The buckshot holes seemed like empty eye sockets staring back at me. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold traced its way down my spine. "Come on," I said, forcing a cheerfulness I didn't feel. "Let's take a walk." A 5-minute walk to a warm diner and a cup of coffee sounds pretty good right now. Maya didn't answer. She just slowly got out of the car, clutching her paper map like a shield, and stared down the dark path that led to Blackwood Ridge. The forest held its breath, and in that moment I felt a deep, primal certainty that we had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. We weren't just lost. We were trespassing. The walk to Blackwood Ridge felt longer than it should have. The path was uneven, choked with weeds that clawed at our jeans. Above us, the sky was a deep, bruised purple, the last vestiges of sunlight bleeding away. The air grew colder, heavier. When the trees finally parted, the town revealed itself not with a welcoming glow, but with a sullen, gray silence. It was like stepping into a photograph from a history book. The main street was lined with 2-story wooden buildings, their facades faded and peeling. A general store with a sagging porch roof stood opposite a barber shop. Its striped pole rusted into a solid block of red and white. Antique cars, models from the 50s and 60s, were parked along the street, their chrome trim dull and their tires flat. A small town square in the center was home to a stone monument I couldn't read in the gloom and a playground where a swing set creaked rhythmically in a breeze I couldn't feel. The whole place was perfectly preserved in a state of quiet decay. But it wasn't abandoned. That was the most unsettling part. On the porch of the general store, an old man in overalls sat in a rocking chair, a piece of wood and a knife in his hands. But he wasn't whittling. He was just holding them, his chair perfectly still, his eyes fixed on us as we emerged from the woods. In the window of an upstairs apartment, the silhouette of a woman parted the lace curtains to watch us pass. A few houses down, a small boy in shorts, impossibly underdressed for the evening chill, stood in his yard holding a red rubber ball, his head cocked as he tracked our movements. No one waved. No one called out. There was no hostility in their gazes, no anger or suspicion. There was just a deep, profound, and unnerving stillness. It was the kind of silent, focused attention you might give to a strange insect crawling across your floor, a mixture of curiosity and a detached sort of pity. They looked at us as if we were something they hadn't seen in a very, very long time. "This is weird," Maya whispered, her arm linked tightly with mine. "They're all just staring." "They're just not used to outsiders," I whispered back, trying to keep my voice steady. "Small town. We're the most exciting thing that's happened all year, probably." But my own words sounded hollow. This wasn't small-town curiosity. This was something else. Something heavy and ancient. I decided to take the initiative. We needed help, and standing around being stared at wasn't going to fix our car. I approached the old man on the porch, forcing a friendly smile onto my face. "Evening, sir," I said, my voice sounding boisterous and out of place. "My name's Ethan." My wife, Maya. Our car broke down a ways up the road. We were hoping there was a mechanic in town, or at least a phone we could use. The man's eyes, pale and cloudy, drifted over me. He didn't seem to register my words. His gaze was distant, unfocused. The rocking chair didn't move. The knife and wood remained frozen in his hands. After a long, uncomfortable silence, he spoke, his voice a dry, rasping whisper, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "Sun's going down," he said, not to me, but to the street, to the air. "Shouldn't be out when the sun goes down." "Right," I said, my smile faltering. "That's why we're hoping to find some help quickly. Is there a payphone or a town office?" He blinked slowly, a deliberate reptilian motion. "No leavin'," he murmured. "Not after the bell." He fell silent again, his attention drifting away from us, back to some fixed point in the middle distance that only he could see. A chill ran through me. This was getting us nowhere. "Okay, well, thank you," I said, backing away. Maya pulled me close. "What did he say?" "Nothing. He's just old. Confused, maybe. But I knew it was more than that. His words, nonsensical as they were, felt less like the ramblings of a senile man and more like a warning. We continued down the street, the feeling of being watched intensifying with every step. Every window seemed to hold a pair of eyes. The silence was a physical weight. There were no sounds of televisions or radios, no dogs barking, no children laughing. The only sound was the rhythmic, lonely creak of that empty swing set in the square. We passed a church, its steeple a dark spike against the darkening sky, a large bronze bell hanging silent in its belfry. We passed a post office with boarded-up windows and a movie theater whose marquee was empty, save for a few dangling letters that spelled out nothing at all. The entire town felt like a stage, the residents its actors, and we had just stumbled into the middle of a play whose script we didn't know. Then we saw it. At the far end of the street, it was the only building that showed any sign of life. A single-story establishment with large plate glass windows, from which a weak, flickering yellow light spilled onto the sidewalk. A neon sign above the door sputtered erratically, its pink letters struggling to spell out a single word. Diner. "There," I said, a surge of relief washing over me. Food, a phone, a normal person to talk to. It was a beacon in the oppressive gloom. It represented warmth, safety, and a connection to the world we had left behind. A world that suddenly felt 1,000,000 miles away. As we walked towards it, I didn't notice the way the boy with the red ball had stopped watching us and was now staring at the setting sun with wide, terrified eyes. I didn't notice the woman in the window letting the curtain fall shut, plunging her room into darkness. All I could see was that flickering sign, a promise of sanctuary. I couldn't have known we were walking out of the frying pan and into the fire. The diner's screen door groaned on rusty hinges as I pulled it open, the sound of a small bell tinkling somewhere inside. The air that hit us was warm but stale, thick with the lingering scent of old coffee and grease. The place was a perfect time capsule from the 1950s. A long Formica countertop ran the length of the room, lined with cracked red vinyl stools. A handful of booths, also red vinyl, were tucked against the large windows that looked out onto the darkening street. A vintage jukebox stood silent in the corner, its chrome trim dulled with age. The clock on the wall above the counter was stopped at 7:29. The only person inside was a woman behind the counter, wiping it down with a damp rag. She looked to be in her late 50s, her hair a mix of brown and gray pulled back in a loose, tired bun. Her face was a roadmap of exhaustion, etched with deep lines around her eyes and mouth. She wore a faded blue waitress uniform that had seen better decades. When she heard the bell, she looked up and her hand froze mid-wipe. All the color drained from her face. Her eyes, which had been weary and listless, widened with a sudden, sharp panic. She stared at us as if she were seeing two ghosts walk through the door. It was the same look of stunned disbelief we'd seen on the faces of the other townspeople, but hers was laced with something more potent. Sheer, undiluted terror. You're not from here," she stammered, her voice a low, shaky whisper. She dropped the rag onto the counter. "No, ma'am," I said, trying to keep my tone light and friendly. "We're just passing through, or we were. Our car died up on the old access road." I gestured to Maya, who gave a weak, hesitant wave. "We saw your sign. We were hoping you had a phone we could use. A landline? Our cells are dead." The woman just stared, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her name tag, pinned crookedly to her uniform, read Brenda. She shook her head, a small, jerky movement. "There's no one to call," she said, her voice barely audible. "No one can help you now." She glanced nervously toward the window, at the last sliver of blood-orange sun disappearing behind the jagged peak of the mountain. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the counter. "You have to go," she said, her voice gaining a desperate urgency. "Now, get in your car and go. Don't stop for anything." "We can't," I explained patiently, stepping closer to the counter. "The car is dead. It won't start. We're stranded. Look, all we need is to call a tow truck from a neighboring town. Maybe Braxton or Somersville. We can pay for the call and for your trouble." Brenda let out a sound that was half a sob, half a laugh, devoid of any humor. "Neighboring town?" she repeated, as if the concept were alien to her. She looked around the empty diner, at the silent jukebox and the stopped clock. "There are no neighboring towns. There's only here." Maya stepped forward, her voice soft and placating. "We're sorry to bother you, ma'am. We're just cold and a little lost. We don't mean any harm." Brenda's frantic gaze softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at Maya. A flicker of pity, of profound sadness, crossed her features. "Harm? Oh, honey, you're the ones in harm's way." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The sun. Do you see it? It's almost gone. You don't understand what happens here when it gets dark. You have less than 10 minutes. You need to get out of town. Run if you have to. Just get into the woods and don't look back." Her genuine fear was contagious. The hairs on my arms stood on end, but my rational mind was still fighting, searching for a logical explanation. Was this some kind of cult? Was the whole town crazy? Were they trying to scare us off for some reason? "Look, Brenda," I said, my patience wearing thin. "We're not looking for trouble. We're just two people with a broken-down car. Can you help us or not? We're tired, we're hungry. At the very least, could we just get a couple of burgers and a coffee while we figure out what to do?" The mention of food seemed to snap her out of her panic, but it was replaced by a look of utter despair. She looked from my face to Maya's, and her shoulders slumped in defeat. It was as if I'd just handed her a death sentence. "You won't leave," she stated, not a question. "You just won't listen." She sighed, a long, rattling exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of years. She turned away from us and picked up a greasy menu from under the counter, her movements slow and resigned, like someone going through the motions of a ritual they knew was pointless. "Fine," she said, her voice flat and devoid of all emotion. "Sit down. I'll make you the food." She wouldn't look at us. She just shuffled toward the pass-through window to the kitchen, her back to us. "But don't say I didn't warn you," she whispered to the empty diner. "Don't you ever say I didn't try to warn you." We chose a booth by the window, the vinyl cold and cracked against my legs. Outside, the street was completely empty now. All the watchers had disappeared. The doors were closed, the windows dark. The town had sealed itself up tight. There was only the creaking swing and the encroaching darkness. As I watched Brenda's slumped shoulders disappear into the kitchen, I had the sinking feeling that by asking for a simple meal, we had just sealed our own fate right along with them. The smell that drifted from the kitchen should have been comforting. It was the classic, all-American aroma of beef patties sizzling on a hot griddle. It spoke of roadside stops, late-night snacks, and simple, honest food. My stomach rumbled in anticipation, the stress and anxiety of the last few hours momentarily eclipsed by a basic, primal hunger. Maya, too, seemed to relax slightly, leaning back against the worn vinyl of the booth. For a few minutes, we were just a couple in a diner, waiting for our dinner. The creeping dread that had settled over Blackwood Ridge felt, for a moment, like a bad dream we were about to wake from. Brenda emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 plates. Her movements were slow, her face a mask of grim resignation. She placed the plates before us without a word. The food looked perfect. It was a picture postcard of a meal. The burgers were thick and juicy, nestled in toasted sesame seed buns with crisp lettuce and a slice of ripe red tomato. A generous pile of golden brown French fries steamed beside them. Ketchup and mustard sat in pristine bottles on the table. It looked delicious, an oasis of normalcy in a desert of strangeness. "This looks great, Brenda." "Thank you," I said, trying to sound genuinely grateful. She just gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head and walked back behind the counter, keeping her back to us. I picked up my burger. The bun was warm and soft. I brought it to my mouth, the savory smell filling my senses. I took a large bite, and my world dissolved into filth. It wasn't a taste. It was an assault. The immediate overwhelming sensation was not of beef or bread, but of rot. It was the taste of grave dirt, of damp, putrid earth packed into my mouth. There was a cloying sweetness, the unmistakable flavor of meat that had gone long past, spoiled, something that had decayed in the sun and been consumed by maggots. A wave of nausea so powerful it made my vision swim crashed over me. I gagged, spitting the mouthful of chewed-up horror onto my plate. The texture was even worse, gritty and mushy at the same time, like biting into a sponge filled with sand and slime. My eyes shot to Maya. She had taken a bite at the same moment. Her face was a canvas of shock and revulsion. Her eyes were wide, her skin deathly pale. She clamped a hand over her mouth, her body convulsing as she fought back a violent urge to vomit. She scrambled out of the booth, stumbling toward the restrooms at the back of the diner, her muffled sobs echoing in the silent room. A hot, white-hot rage surged through me, eclipsing the nausea. I shot to my feet, the legs of the table screeching against the linoleum floor.
"What the hell is this?"
I roared, my voice shaking with fury. I slammed my hand down on the table, rattling the plates. "Are you trying to poison us? Is this some kind of sick joke?" Brenda turned around slowly. There were tears welling in her tired eyes, but her expression wasn't one of guilt or surprise. It was one of crushing, infinite sadness. "There's nothing wrong with the food," she said, her voice trembling. "Nothing wrong with it?" I screeched, incredulous. I jabbed a finger at the disgusting mess on my plate. "It tastes like you dug it out of a cemetery. It's rotten. It's poison." My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. This whole town. It was a trap. They lure people in, feed them spoiled food, and then what? Rob them? Worse? The staring, the cryptic warnings. It was all part of some twisted game. "Please," she whispered, tears now streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Just, please don't." "Don't what?" "Don't call you out on serving garbage to people." I grabbed a handful of the French fries. They looked perfect, crisp and golden. I held them out to her. "You eat one. Go on. Tell me this is fresh." To my utter astonishment, she walked over, her steps heavy. She took a single fry from my hand, her fingers trembling. She looked at it for a long moment, a look of profound sorrow on her face, as if she were saying goodbye to an old friend. Then she put it in her mouth and chewed. Her eyes locked on mine. She swallowed with a pained effort. "It's fine, you see?" she said, her voice cracking. "There's nothing wrong with it. It's just... you don't belong here, so you can't taste it right." Her words made no sense. It was the ravings of a mad woman. I watched her, my anger faltering, replaced by a cold, creeping confusion. She wasn't lying. At least she didn't believe she was. She had eaten the food that tasted like death to me, and she was still standing. Maya returned from the restroom, her face blotchy and tear-stained. "Ethan, let's just go," she pleaded, tugging at my arm. "I don't care about the car anymore. I'll walk all night. Please, let's just get out of this place." The disgust and the fury had curdled into a knot of pure fear in my gut. Brenda was right about one thing. We didn't belong here. I threw a $20 bill onto the table, the gesture feeling absurd and meaningless. "Keep it," I spat, the bitter taste still coating my tongue. "We're leaving." We turned and practically ran for the door, desperate for fresh air, for an escape from the stale, lie-filled diner and its insane proprietor. As I pushed the screen door open and we stumbled out into the twilight, the last thing I heard was Brenda's broken whisper behind us. "It's too late." We burst out of the diner and into the cold, purple twilight. The air was a shock to my lungs, clean and sharp after the greasy staleness inside, but it did little to wash the phantom taste of decay from my mouth. The main street of Blackwood Ridge was utterly deserted, a strip of deepening shadows and silent, watching buildings. The world seemed to be holding its breath. "I can't believe her," I seethed, my voice a harsh whisper. "The whole town is in on it. Some kind of backwoods scam." "It's not a scam, Ethan," Maya said, her voice trembling as she clutched my arm. Her intuition, the thing I usually dismissed as oversensitivity, was screaming now, and even I couldn't ignore it. Something is wrong with this place. Genuinely, horribly wrong. Brenda wasn't lying, she was terrified. I looked up and down the street, my anger giving way to a primal sense of being trapped. We had no car, no phone, no allies. The woods that surrounded the town no longer looked like a potential escape route, but like a black, churning ocean waiting to swallow us. The sun was gone. A single bright star, probably Venus, had appeared in the darkening sky. And then it happened. From the belfry of the old, dark church, a sound shattered the silence. It wasn't the cheerful peal of Sunday service. It was a single, resonant, soul-shaking toll of a massive bronze bell. Bong. The sound rolled through the valley, deep and mournful, vibrating in my bones, a sound of finality, of judgment. It echoed off the mountains and faded into a humming silence that was somehow more profound and terrifying than the quiet that had preceded it. The effect on the town was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if that single toll had been a starting gun for a race of terror. Lights that I hadn't even realized were on in the houses blinked out one by one. The sound of a heavy bar being dropped into place echoed from the general store. From another house came the frantic, rhythmic hammering of a nail into wood. Shutters were slammed closed with a series of loud cracks that sounded like gunshots in the stillness. The entire town, which had been passive and watchful, was now consumed by a mad, synchronized panic. They weren't just locking their doors, they were fortifying their homes. They were battening down the hatches for a hurricane I couldn't see. "What is going on?" Maya breathed, her nails digging into my arm. Before I could answer, the door to the diner flew open. Brenda stood silhouetted against the weak interior light, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. "I told you," she shrieked, her voice raw with panic. "I told you to leave. Why didn't you listen?" "Listen to what?" I yelled back, my own fear starting to boil over into anger again. "What is happening?" "There's no time!" she screamed, waving us frantically toward her. "Get back inside! Now! Oh God, it's coming!" A new sound reached us, faint but unmistakable, carried on the cold night air. It was a scream, a long, drawn-out shriek of agony that came from somewhere at the edge of town, near the woods. It wasn't human. It was too high-pitched, too filled with a kind of keening despair that no person could produce. The sound was cut off abruptly. Brenda's plea turned into a desperate command. "It's here. For the love of God, get inside." Her terror was no act. It was the most real and potent emotion I had ever witnessed. It was the fear of a creature who knows the monster under its bed is not only real, but is climbing the stairs. It cut through my skepticism and my anger and hit me right in the lizard part of my brain, the part that only knows fight or flight. Hesitation vanished. I grabbed Maya's hand and we bolted back toward the diner, our feet pounding on the cracked pavement. The air had grown unnaturally cold, a deep, penetrating chill that felt like it was emanating from the ground itself. We scrambled through the door just as Brenda was fumbling with a series of locks I hadn't noticed before. A heavy deadbolt, a thick slide lock, and a massive iron bar that she dropped into heavy brackets on either side of the doorframe. The finality of that bar slamming into place sealed us in. The only light was the weak yellow glow from the kitchen and the flickering neon sign outside, which cast long, dancing shadows across the room. "Down! Get down and stay away from the windows," Brenda hissed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She scurried around the diner, yanking down stained, yellowed blinds over the large plate glass windows, plunging the room into near-total darkness. She crouched behind the counter, gesturing for us to join her. I pulled Maya down with me, our backs pressed against the cool linoleum of the counter's base. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Maya was shaking uncontrollably beside me. "What is coming?" I whispered into the suffocating dark. "What was that scream?" Brenda didn't answer. She just put a trembling finger to her lips, her eyes wide and staring at the now-covered windows. Outside, the world had fallen completely silent once more. It was a dead, waiting silence, the silence of a tomb. And we were locked inside it, waiting for something terrible to begin. We huddled in the oppressive darkness behind the counter, the silence stretching for what felt like an eternity. Every creak of the old building, every hum from the ancient drink cooler, was amplified into a deafening roar. I could hear Maya's ragged breathing, and the frantic, syncopated rhythm of my own heartbeat. Brenda was a statue of terror beside us, her eyes fixed on the front of the diner, her body as rigid as stone. The weak, sputtering light from the neon sign outside was the only illumination, painting the drawn blinds with a sickly pinkish glow. Then the silence was broken. It began with a distant sound, so faint I wasn't sure I'd heard it at all. A slow, rhythmic scrape, drag, scrape, drag. It was the sound of something heavy being pulled along the gravel street. It grew steadily louder, closer. It was accompanied by a low, wet, guttural clicking, a sound like 1,000 insects chittering in unison. My blood ran cold. Brenda let out a tiny, choked whimper and squeezed her eyes shut. I had to see. My rational mind, even in its terror, screamed for visual confirmation. I needed to put a face to the fear. Slowly, carefully, I raised my head just enough to peer through the small gap between two of the blinds on the front door's window. The street was bathed in a pale, ethereal moonlight that seemed to be swallowed by the suffocating darkness of the town. And then I saw him. It. Moving down the center of the street. It was tall, impossibly so, at least 7 feet, and skeletally thin. It was dressed in a tattered dark suit that might have been black a century ago, now faded to the color of charcoal and dust. On its head it wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed its face in absolute darkness. Its movements were all wrong, jerky and unnatural, like a marionette being controlled by a clumsy puppeteer. One of its legs seemed to be lame, dragging behind it with that awful scraping sound, its shoe-clad foot leaving a shallow furrow in the dirt road. It moved with a terrifying purpose, stopping at the first house on the street. It paused, its head tilting at an impossible angle as if listening. Then it glided toward the front porch. I braced myself for the sound of splintering wood, of a door being smashed in. But it did nothing of the sort. It simply bent down, its lanky frame folding in on itself, and peered into the front window, its hatted head pressed against the glass. It stayed there for a long, silent minute before straightening up and moving to the next house, repeating the process. It was a hunter, a methodical, patient predator, checking each and every cage for a sign of life. As it drew closer to the diner, the moonlight caught its face, and a wave of pure, undiluted horror washed over me. What I had taken for shadow under the brim of its hat was not shadow at all. It was a void. There was no discernible face, no features, just a pale, smooth expanse of skin like bleached bone. Except for the eyes and the mouth. Its eyes were 2 pinpricks of brilliant, cold white light like distant dying stars. They held no emotion, no intelligence, just a piercing, empty luminescence. And the mouth, dear God, the mouth. It was frozen in a wide, silent grin that stretched from ear to ear. The grin was packed, absolutely filled, with row upon row of long, needle-thin teeth, like a deep-sea fish, a predator from a place where the sun has never shone. The low, clicking sound was coming from that horrifying maw. My breath hitched in my throat, and I ducked back down behind the counter, my body trembling. "What is it?" Maya whispered, her voice a thread of sound. I couldn't form the words. The image was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. A man, I finally managed to choke out. Tall. In a hat. Brenda let out a shuddering breath. "The Reaper," she whispered, her voice filled with a dreadful reverence. "He reaps what was sown. He's looking. Always looking. He can't come in unless he's invited. Unless he sees you. He has to see you." The scraping was right outside now. It stopped directly in front of the diner. The insect-like chittering was louder, a dry, hungry sound that seemed to drill into my skull. My heart hammered against my ribs, convinced it would burst through my chest. The three of us were frozen, barely breathing, a tableau of silent terror. I could feel the creature's presence on the other side of the wall, a palpable aura of ancient cold and malice. Through the blinds, the pink neon glow was momentarily blocked by a large, dark shape. The Reaper was at our window. It was peering in, its head tilted, its terrible white eyes searching the darkness for any flicker of movement, any sign of life. Time seemed to stop. The world narrowed to the single terrifying moment. Us, holding our breath in the dark, and the thing outside. The smiling nightmare. Trying to look in. Don't see us, I prayed to a god I hadn't spoken to in years. Please, whatever you are, don't see us. An eternity passed in a single minute. The dark shape at the window remained motionless, a predator sensing for the faintest tremor of its prey. The chittering sound from its needle-toothed mouth was a constant, unnerving hum. I was convinced it could hear my heart, a frantic drum telegraphing our position. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if not seeing it would make us invisible in return. Then the shape moved. The scraping sound resumed as the creature, apparently satisfied that the diner was empty, began to drag itself away, continuing its grim patrol down the street. A collective silent sigh of relief passed between the three of us. Brenda slumped against the counter, her face slick with sweat in the dim light. I felt the tension in my shoulders release, a painful untangling of knotted muscle. We had survived. It had passed us by. I risked another glance through the blinds. The Reaper was 20, maybe 30 feet down the street, its jerky, limping gait carrying it toward the old general store. Its back was to us. "It's gone," I whispered, the words catching in my dry throat. But Maya didn't seem to hear me. While Brenda and I had been paralyzed by fear, she seemed to be caught in its spell. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and fixed on the window, a look of horrified fascination on her features. She was mesmerized, a mouse watching a cobra. "Maya, don't," I hissed, reaching for her arm. "Get down." But it was too late. As if sensing my movement, she rose slightly, her curiosity or her terror compelling her to get one last look at the thing that had nearly found us. She pressed her face closer to the gap in the blinds, her eyes tracking the retreating figure. In that same instant, the creature stopped dead in the middle of the street. It didn't slow down. It didn't turn. It just froze, mid-stride. For a horrifying second, it was perfectly still. Then, with a speed that defied its broken, shuffling gait, its head snapped around, rotating a full 180 degrees with an audible series of dry cracks like a bundle of sticks breaking. Its glowing white eyes were no longer scanning the street. They were locked directly onto the diner window, directly onto Maya. It had felt her gaze. It had seen her. A sound erupted from its grinning mouth, a sound that was not a scream but a shriek, a high, piercing, triumphant frequency that vibrated through the glass, through the walls, through our very bones. It was a sound of discovery, of hunger about to be sated. And then its body began to change. The transformation was a grotesque spectacle of biological horror. Its thin limbs buckled and snapped, reforming at unnatural angles. The tattered suit tore apart as the creature's torso expanded, a grotesque bloom of muscle and sinew. Coarse black fur erupted from its pale skin, covering its body in seconds. Its emaciated frame swelled, growing impossibly large, its spine elongating with a series of wet, tearing sounds. The wide-brimmed hat fell away, revealing a head that was no longer remotely human, but lupine and monstrous, its jaw unhinging to an impossible degree, the needle-like teeth now the size of daggers. The white-hot points of its eyes burned with a newfound ravenous intelligence. The thing that had been the Reaper was gone, replaced by a beast from the deepest pits of hell. It stood on two powerfully built digitigrade legs, now easily 10 feet tall, its massive claws digging into the asphalt. It let out another roar, this one a deep, guttural bellow of pure rage and predatory fury. "It saw you!" Brenda shrieked, scrambling backward on her hands and knees. "Oh God, it saw you!" The beast lowered its head like a charging bull and launched itself at the diner. There was no finesse, no attempt to open the door. It simply crashed through the front of the building. The plate glass window, the door, and a wide section of the wall exploded inward in a shower of splintering wood, shattered glass, and plaster dust. The neon sign above was torn from its mountings, crashing to the floor in a shower of sparks that momentarily illuminated the monster's terrifying form as it stepped into the wreckage. It stood there, its massive frame filling the newly made hole, its white eyes scanning the darkened, debris-strewn room, sniffing the air. The chittering was gone, replaced by a low, rumbling growl that vibrated in my chest. Its gaze fell upon us, cowering behind the now exposed counter. It had our scent. It had our fear. And there was nowhere left to hide. Chaos erupted. The monster's roar was a physical force, a concussive blast of sound that shook the entire building. It took a step into the diner, its massive claws scraping against the linoleum, and swiped a table out of its way. The wooden table flew across the room and shattered against the far wall like balsa wood. Shards of glass and splintered debris rained down around us. The air was thick with the dust of destruction and the creature's foul, carrion-like stench. My mind went blank with terror. I was frozen, my body refusing to obey the frantic signals from my brain. This was it. This was how we died, torn apart by a nightmare in a forgotten town. But Brenda was moving. The terror that had paralyzed her moments before had been forged into a sharp, desperate will to survive. She grabbed the front of my shirt, her grip surprisingly strong, and yanked me back from the brink of catatonia. "The cellar!" she screamed over the monster's guttural snarls. "To the kitchen, now!" Her words broke the spell. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I grabbed Maya's hand, it was limp and icy cold, and pulled her with me. We scrambled on our hands and knees behind the relative safety of the long counter, away from the creature's line of sight. It was busy demolishing the booths, tossing them aside like a child's toys, its white eyes scanning the room with a furious intensity. We reached the swinging door to the kitchen and burst through. Brenda was right behind us. She didn't pause, instead running to a corner of the kitchen where a heavy wooden trapdoor was set into the floor, a thick iron ring bolted to its center. "Help me!" she grunted, tugging at the ring. I threw my weight into it with her. The door was heavy, swollen with age and dampness. With a groan of protesting wood, it lifted, revealing a flight of steep stone steps descending into a black, musty-smelling void. A deafening crash from the main room told us the counter had been obliterated. The monster bellowed in frustration. It knew we were close. "Go!" Brenda yelled, pushing Maya toward the opening. "Get down there!" Maya stumbled down the first few steps, her movements clumsy with fear. I was right behind her. Brenda followed, pulling the heavy door down over our heads. We were plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. A moment later, a cataclysmic boom echoed from above as the monster landed on the cellar door, its immense weight making the thick wood groan and splinter. "It won't hold for long," Brenda gasped, her voice trembling in the dark. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I finally managed to turn on the flashlight, its bright beam cutting a sharp cone through the blackness. And we saw where we were. The cellar was small, with stone walls slick with moisture. But it wasn't the dampness or the confined space that made my stomach lurch. It was what covered the floor. Bones. Human bones. Skulls, ribs, femurs, piled in corners, scattered across the dirt floor like firewood. Some were yellowed with age, others were still disturbingly white. There were dozens of them. We were in a mass grave. A larder. The beast above us roared again, and this time its fury was directed downward. A massive claw tore through the trapdoor, sending a shower of splinters and dust down on us. The wood screeched and cracked. Another blow, and a huge section of the door shattered, revealing one of the creature's glowing white eyes peering down at us, burning with hate. It was over. We were trapped. But Brenda wasn't looking up. She was pointing the beam of her own small flashlight toward the far wall. "There," she cried, her voice strained. Set low in the stone foundation was a small, rectangular opening, a tiny cellar window, barely 2 feet wide, caked with dirt and grime. It was our only way out. "It's too small," I said, my voice filled with despair. "You have to try." Brenda shoved me toward it. "You first, get her out." The monster was tearing the cellar door apart now, ripping it to shreds with its claws. We had seconds. I scrambled over a pile of bones to the window and kicked at it. The old wood frame splintered, and the grimy pane of glass fell out into the dirt outside with a soft thud. Cool night air rushed in. "Maya, go!" I yelled, grabbing her and practically shoving her headfirst through the opening. She was small enough to squeeze through, scraping her arms and back on the rough stone. She tumbled out onto the damp ground on the other side. I scrambled to follow, the monster's roars echoing in the small space behind me. It was a tight fit. The stone scraped my ribs, my shoulders catching on the frame. I kicked and twisted, adrenaline giving me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I was halfway out when I felt a searing pain in my calf. One of the beast's claws had shot through the widening hole in the ceiling, its tip tearing through my jeans and into my flesh. I screamed, kicking wildly with my free leg, and managed to pull myself free. I tumbled out of the window, landing hard beside Maya. I looked back through the opening. The cellar door was gone. The monster was lowering its massive head and shoulders into the hole, and Brenda was standing there, directly in its path. She wasn't trying to run. She was just standing in the beam of my phone's light, her face pale, her expression one of weary acceptance. She looked at us, through the small window, and for a fleeting moment, she almost smiled. "Run," she mouthed. "Run and don't ever look back." She turned to face the beast as it dropped into the cellar. We didn't wait to see what happened next. We heard the shattering of bone, the wet, tearing sound of flesh, and one final, piercing scream of agony that was abruptly cut short. Then only the sound of the monster's furious, guttural feeding. We didn't need to be told twice. We ran. We fled into the suffocating darkness of the Appalachian forest, driven by a terror so pure and absolute it superseded all thought. We didn't have a direction. We just ran away from the sounds of the diner, away from the monster that had claimed Brenda's life. The forest became a hostile, living entity. Gnarled roots, hidden in the deep loam, grabbed at our ankles, sending us sprawling into the damp leaves. Low-hanging branches, invisible in the gloom, whipped across our faces, leaving stinging welts. My torn calf throbbed with a fiery pain, but the adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic, pushing me forward. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves in the unseen undergrowth sent a fresh jolt of panic through us. We were convinced the beast was right behind us, its massive form crashing through the trees, its white eyes burning through the dark. We didn't dare look back. We just ran, our lungs burning, our legs screaming in protest, fueled by the primal, desperate need to put distance between ourselves and the nightmare of Blackwood Ridge. I don't know how long we ran. Hours, maybe. The moon provided little light through the dense canopy, and we stumbled through the darkness in a blind panic. We fell, we got up, we kept moving. Maya was sobbing, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps, but she never stopped. We were bound together by a shared, silent terror. Eventually, exhaustion began to win its war against adrenaline. My leg was on fire and I could feel wetness soaking through my jeans. We slowed to a stumbling walk, leaning on each other for support, pushing our way through the last thicket of thorny bushes. And then we broke through. The trees thinned, and we found ourselves standing on the edge of a clearing. My heart sank into a pit of icy despair. We hadn't escaped. We had run in a circle. Before us, silhouetted against the first pale gray light of dawn, was Blackwood Ridge. But it wasn't the same town. The place we had entered yesterday had been old, decaying, but intact. This was a ruin. The buildings were skeletal, their roofs caved in, their walls little more than collections of rotting, splintered planks. The general store was a collapsed heap of lumber, its porch roof lying in a pile of rubble on the ground. The windows of the houses were empty, black sockets, their doors hanging off broken hinges or gone completely. The main street was not dirt but a bed of weeds and wildflowers, cracked asphalt peeking through in pathetic patches. The antique cars were still there, but they were rusted-out shells, their interiors gutted, their metal bodies surrendering to the relentless forest. This was not a town that had been alive yesterday. This was a town that had been dead for 50 years. "No," Maya whispered, her voice cracking. "No, it can't be." Hesitantly, like survivors of a shipwreck exploring a deserted island, we walked down the main street. The silence was different now. It was not the heavy, watchful silence of yesterday evening. It was the empty, hollow silence of a graveyard. We approached the ruins of a house where we'd seen the woman watching from the window. Cautiously, I peered inside. The floor had rotted through, revealing the dark earth beneath. In the far corner, slumped against a crumbling stone fireplace, was a human skeleton. It was clad in the rotted tatters of what might have been a dress. We checked another house, the one where the boy with the red ball had stood. We found a smaller skeleton in a collapsed bedroom, a small, faded red ball lying just a few feet from its bony fingers. Everywhere we looked, it was the same story. Skeletons in chairs, in beds, behind the counters of collapsed stores. This wasn't just a ghost town. It was the tomb of an entire population, left exactly where they had fallen on some long-forgotten night of terror. We stood in the center of the weed-choked square, the morning sun now cresting the mountain ridge, casting long, mournful shadows across the ruins. The swing set I had heard creaking was a tangle of rusted chains, one seat missing, the other lying half-buried in the dirt. It didn't make sense. None of it did. We had spoken to these people. We had been in their diner. We had eaten their food. We had seen them panic. We had witnessed Brenda's death. But here was the proof, in decaying wood and bleaching bone, that none of them had been alive for a very, very long time. We hadn't stumbled into a strange town. We had stumbled into its ghost. Drawn by a morbid, inexplicable pull, we made our way to the end of the street, to where the diner had stood. All that remained was a collapsed foundation and a pile of charred, rotting timbers. There was no sign of the carnage from the night before. No shattered glass, no splintered wall, no hulking monster. There was only the quiet decay of decades. The ground where I had fallen out of the cellar window was just a patch of weeds and damp earth. "It was real," Maya said, her voice a fragile whisper against the morning silence. "Brenda, she was real. I know she was." "I know," I said, my own mind struggling to reconcile the vivid, bloody memories of the night with the ancient ruin before me. My leg throbbed, the torn flesh and dried blood on my jeans a stark physical reminder that the horror had been tangible. I walked around to the back of the foundation, where the kitchen would have been. Something glinted in the dirt near the collapsed chimney stack. A small, dark shape. I knelt down, my knee protesting, and brushed away the soil and leaves. It was a metal box, a simple tin lunch pail, the kind miners used to carry. It was rusted shut, but the metal was still sound. I found a heavy rock and hammered at the latch until it broke with a sharp crack. Inside, protected from the elements, was a small, leather-bound journal and a faded, sepia-toned photograph of a smiling couple. The woman in the photo was younger, her face not yet etched with weariness, but it was unmistakably Brenda. The man beside her had a kind, handsome face and strong hands. I opened the journal. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the handwriting was still legible. It was a diary. The last few entries were written in a frantic, spidery scrawl. October 29th, 1958. Hit the mother lode today. Seam K12. Pure anthracite, clean as a whistle. Boys are saying old man Blackwood was right, this ridge will make us all rich. Brenda says not to count my chickens. Says the mountain gives, but it always takes two. Bought her a new dress with my bonus. Said she looked like a movie star. I flipped ahead, the entries growing more sporadic and worried. November 4th, 1958. Something strange today. We broke through at the bottom of K12. Not into more rock, but a cavern. Big one. The air that came out, it was cold. Wrong. Smelled like a butchery left in the sun. Old Jed refused to go back down. Said he heard something whispering from the dark. Called him a coward, but I felt it too. A deep cold in my bones. The last entry was dated the following day. The handwriting was nearly illegible, the words crashing into one another, sentences left unfinished. November 5th, 1958. God forgive us. It came out. The cold came out. Jed was right. It wasn't a whisper. It was hunger. The hunger that slept under the earth. We woke it up. It came into town at sunset, just as the church bell rang for evening prayer. Looked like a man at first, a tall man in a hat, like a traveling preacher. The Reaper, some are calling him. He's going house to house, the screams. Oh God, the screams. I've barricaded the door to the diner cellar. Brenda is with me. If anyone finds this, tell them not to dig deep in these hills. Tell them what we woke up is still hungry. The entry ended there, a long, dark smear of ink trailing off the page. It all clicked into place, a horrifying, impossible mosaic of truth. The town hadn't just died, it had been slaughtered, wiped out in a single night by the thing they had unearthed. And we had somehow stepped into an echo, a ghostly replay of that final terrifying night, trapped in a loop with the town's tormented spirits. Brenda, the old man, all of them, they were ghosts, forced to relive their deaths every time the sun went down. The food tasted like rot to us because we were alive, trying to consume the memory of a meal. We closed the box, a silent epitaph for a town's last moments. We walked back the way we came, down the phantom path to the main road. And there, sitting exactly where we had left it, was my Ford Explorer. It wasn't sputtering. It wasn't dead. It was just parked, looking perfectly normal, as if waiting for us. I got in, and the engine started on the first try with a healthy, reassuring roar. The check engine light was off. We didn't speak as I pulled away, leaving the ruins of Blackwood Ridge behind us. We drove for miles, the sun climbing higher in the sky, the ancient green mountains rolling by. It was only when we finally hit the blessed paved asphalt of Route 219 that Maya looked in the passenger side mirror. She gasped. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Look," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and sorrow. I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a single fleeting second, the road behind us wasn't empty. The image of Blackwood Ridge was there, but not the ruin. It was the town from yesterday, whole and preserved under the morning sun. And standing on the porch of the last stop diner, a solitary figure was waving. It was Brenda, her face not filled with terror, but with a sad, gentle smile of farewell. Then, like a heat haze on the highway, the image shimmered and was gone, leaving only the empty road behind us. She wasn't a monster or a tormentor. She was a prisoner, and in her own way, she had set us free.